Hey guys, I'm going to talk with you about the judicial branch. I'm going to break it up into three different presentations. So, this one I'm just going to talk about how do people get appointed to different levels of the federal court system. The second one I'm going to talk with you about is how does the Supreme Court actually function? And then the last little one I'll talk about is how do justices on the Supreme Court decide to make decisions? So hopefully by now you've read the beginning of chapter 9 and you watched the crash course videos I posted and you worked through some of that vocab that I had put on that sheet for you because we're going to jump into some stuff, so I want to make sure you're ready to go. All right, so when it comes to selecting judges for various positions in our country, of course, like everything we've talked about, there's politics involved. So hopefully you remember talking about the dual court system, right? We have the federal court system, which operates for the whole country, and then individual states have their own court system as well. So when it comes to federal justices, anyone in the federal court system, it does not matter what level, gets appointed by the president and gets confirmed by the Senate with a majority vote. Okay. So it doesn't matter. Supreme Court, everyone knows that, but lower courts, that's also how it applies. When you get appointed to your position, you are appointed for life. You can resign if you want. If you get promoted to a higher level court, you could take that as well, but there are no term limits for federal justices. In order to kind of separate federal court justices from, you know, voting and popular opinion, salaries can't be changed by Congress. So that's kind of a check to make sure that Congress can't force the Supreme Court to do something they want it to do by messing with their money. The president usually, yes, he appoints all of the justices. Usually he's going to care about the higher courts, and I'll get into in the next slide or two how the president determines all of these different justices that he's going to appoint. But usually the higher up in the court system you go, the president's going to take more of an interest in who's actually being appointed. At the state level, state justices are elected by the people. So if you paid attention to the election that happened in Wisconsin last week, it was pretty chaotic because of people having to vote in person during the COVID outbreak, but also we did hold an election for a Wisconsin Supreme Court justice, and a sitting judge he lost to someone who was challenging him, which does not happen very often. So we actually had a Democratic, well, technically she's not Democratic, but ideologically she's liberal, upset someone who had been on the court who had more conservative ideology. States have fixed term limits. So you do have to run every certain number of years. In Wisconsin, it's 10 years. Every state can kind of set their own limit for how that's going to work. All right. So everything I talk about from here on out, though, we're going to focus on the federal court system. So a couple things about how people get nominated to the lower court system. First of all, presidents often use something called senatorial courtesy because, like I said, presidents care about the higher up you go because that's what's going to influence a lot of the policy in our country. So for the lower courts, basically what's happening, this is nowhere in the Constitution. It's kind of just a tradition that has been followed. People in the Senate aren't going to confirm someone for those lower level district court positions if it's opposed by a couple groups of people. So number one, if someone from the president's party, so in this case, remember that's the Republicans, the senators from the state where the judge is going to serve, if they do not agree with that appointment, they're going to tell people like, hey, do not put through this nomination because we don't support what this person stands for. The other times that the Senate isn't going to confirm an appointment is if the nominee lives in a state where that senator is from and they kind of know their background and their ideology and how they're going to behave. And if those senators are like, yeah, this is not a good decision for our court, they will also not appoint it. Okay. So basically, it kind of has to do with ideology. And even if you tend to follow the same ideological idea as the president, if people from that state who are familiar with you aren't comfortable with you, they're not going to approve you and they're going to convince everyone else as well that they should not confirm you. Usually, because of this senatorial courtesy, the president is pretty cautious about who he's going to appoint because if it's not going to go through the Senate, why is he wasting his time making the appointment? So usually the president, probably not himself, has a lot of people to work for him, is going to check ahead of time and make sure that the senators from that area are comfortable with that appointment so he knows that his confirmation is going to go through. All right, backgrounds of judges and justices. So this is not all inclusive of everything, just to kind of give you an idea of who is on our federal court system. There is a good chart in your book. It kind of shows the last few presidents, what the different demographics of people that have been appointed. And my next slide, I also have a picture so you can see as well. So first of all, in the Constitution, there's no specific guidelines. So there's not an age limit, there's not a citizenship limit. It's not as strict as it is for the president and for Congress. Most people argue that federal judges are not representative of the American people. Mostly federal justices are white, not all, but that is an overwhelming majority. Most of them have a background in some sort of law. So they have been a lawyer, they have been a prosecutor, they've been involved in the law system before. And remember, partisan means you take the side of a party. So usually you can tell if that person is going to be more liberal or conservative. And then when they make decisions on the court, they're probably going to fall that way. When it comes to, remember, whenever you see SCOTUS, that means Supreme Court of the United States. All of the Supreme Court justices have law backgrounds. Almost all of them, and I'll show you a website right at the end of this, have been white males. Most Supreme Court justices are upper middle class, so they come from money background. Religious-wise, most of them have a religious affiliation, and most of them are Protestant. Usually they're older when they get appointed, and you'll see from the pictures, they tend to stay for a long time, so it tends to be a pretty old court. And then a lot of people have had previous government experience, a lot of times working for the Department of Justice, so they're very familiar with the Supreme Court and the players involved and the people that they need to work with to get things done. So this is our current Supreme Court. This is our newest person. Brett Kavanaugh was added. People that kind of paid attention to the news last year or two may recall hearing about him. There was a lot of accusations flying around, and there was questions about if he was going to make it through the Senate confirmation process, which he did. So this is our current Supreme Court. And like I said, there's a good chart if you want to look in your book too about the different demographics of people that have been appointed. Okay, last thing to talk about. So nominations to get to the Supreme Court. Okay, so specifically we are talking about these people right here. Like I said, this is really important to the president. This can be a very important lasting legacy. President Trump has talked about quite often, leaving a court behind that will support his conservative ideals. Biggest thing to remember here, you can only appoint someone to the Supreme Court if a position is open. All right, so so far, President Trump has been able to appoint 2 people. There have been 2 positions open. Some people are worried, if I go back for a second, Justice Ginsburg is getting kind of old. She's had some cancer scares, some health scares. So if, she were to quit, or unfortunately, if she were to pass away, then President Trump would be able to appoint someone to take her position. All right, and then the Chief Justice. Okay, so a lot of times you'll hear referred to as a Chief Justice. That is a person who kind of is, in air quotes, in charge of the Supreme Court. So head of the Supreme Court, if there is a vacancy, so if the Chief Justice resigns or gets impeached or passes away, you can either pick from one of the remaining justices to fill that position, and then you'd have to go through the nomination process to fill his job, or you can pick someone brand new to take over that Chief Justice position. And whoever becomes the head of the Supreme Court has to go through Senate approval. So even if you're already sitting on the court, if you're going to take over and become the Chief Justice, you have to get approved by the Senate as well. All right, so of course, politics of getting appointed to the Supreme Court. So like I said, the president isn't out here doing all this work by himself. It's impossible. There's too much to do. So a lot of people help the president kind of get some good ideas. So you have aides in the White House, Department of Justice, because remember, they're familiar with people. Their job is to kind of screen some potential candidates, and they're really digging to see, like, what's your ideology? What have you said? I mean, there have been things that have come up with people that they wrote as 18-year-old college students, and it gets held against them when they're going through Senate confirmation. So they really want to make sure that the candidates that are put forth are going to stand up to all that scrutiny. The president is much less likely to take senatorial advice here because remember, the president wants to have a legacy. He wants a good, strong person to be in that spot for a long time. Typically, the president is going to appoint someone along party lines. So if you're a Republican, you're going to look for someone with a conservative ideology. A lot of times you'll hear it referred to as packing the court. So you want as many people on your ideological side as you can, because then you know if something that's controversial comes up, you're going to get a decision that your party and your ideological similar people are going to support. So, for example, we've really been hearing about abortion again recently. Okay, we have a conservative court. Conservatives tend to not support abortion. So, potentially, what gets up to the Supreme Court might fall in favor of the Republicans and the conservatives in our country because that is the lines that our court is in right now. All right, so you don't have to do anything. This is something we did in class, but if you're curious about who's currently on our Supreme Court, supremecourt.gov, their homepage, everything that they do is up there. Otherwise, the Supreme Court history is kind of interesting just to see like how old people are when they get appointed and what their ideology falls under and things like that. All right, and then I'm going to post, I think I have a crash course video related to this. If not, I will follow up and let you know, but I have a crying kid that I have to go get anyway. So that is the end of this presentation.